I want to remember Sumit Sarkar today above all as a teacher. His scholarship was remarkable in so many ways, and its legacy will survive physically and literally. Sumit the teacher was utterly immeasurable, and his impact incalculable. His classroom and the way he taught us and generations of students how to think and not what to think was a magic space that can be recovered only very, very partially through our recollections, fraying lecture notes perhaps. It is that immeasurable and unarchivable Sumit that I want to recall a bit. Through his extraordinary textbook, Modern India, Sumit had started teaching us in our final year of BA long before we met him. Then in the MA, he taught us this paper that Charu's talked about on European history and culture that got us really hooked onto history, the kind of nuanced and layered history that he wrote and introduced to us to in class. We knew Italian words from Sumit's lectures and our long discussions on Italian humanism and art. Our interest in looking at detail, understanding various perspectives, tracing complex histories, and being attentive also to histories of the marginalized grew in these classes. We learnt of Leonardo da Vinci referring to himself as uomo senza lettere, unlettered man. We went on to discover the brilliant scholarship of the likes of Carlo Ginzburg, Burke, Scribner, Natalie Davis, Lyndall Roper, Mary Weisner, and so many others. He made us read Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose to start with. That was the beginning of the course. When I went to Italy decades later, I remembered the details like Masaccio's early 15th century depiction of the poor in his painting St. Peter healing the sick with his shadow, in the Brancacci Chapel frescoes in Santa Maria della Carmine in Florence, because we had discussed this and other paintings of the Renaissance at length in class. We had read about peasant protests in Germany before the 16th century Peasants' War. Hans Bohm, the drummer of Niklashausen, the poor Conrads who supposedly led secret peasant leagues in the years before the Peasants' War. Sumit's classes made our minds buzz with ideas, even though his style of lecturing was always measured and undramatic. I recall how his sense of humor and irreverence often came through in the classroom while discussing, for instance, the scatological woodcuts of the Protestant Reformation that Robert Scribner had written about, allowing our class to also crack up with laughter and be grateful that he wasn't under the jurisdiction of the 16th century Pope. Through all these discussions, we engaged with material histories, class, religion, and the ways in which environment shaped consciousness and society. Many of these themes remain the focus of our MA final paper on social history in India, which Sumit taught. He introduced us to readings on popular movements, class, religion, and community. We read widely. We read Genovese on slavery, religion, and resistance, among others, to engage with and understand all these issues. I vividly remember Sumit's class on 7th December 1992, the day after the demolition of the Babri Masjid. We were all somewhat stunned. That day, Sumit cited Raymond Williams, spoke of the dangers of narrow economic determinism, of how material conditions are not simply economic conditions, and how the interpenetration of multiple identities of caste, class, gender, religious community need to be closely studied. That same evening, a city-based group called the People's Movement for Secularism came together, and a similar group forum came up in DU, and Sumit was actively involved in both. When I think of Sumit, I remember seeing him walking a kilometer or more every morning to the arts faculty, wearing his favorite teal blue sweater, somewhat lost in his thoughts, oblivious to the chaos of Delhi University's Chhatra Marg around him, or to a student hollering, "Good morning, sir," to him from a rickshaw across the road. I think he managed to get a lot of exercise on that, between that walk to and fro from the house and the vast amount he walked while pacing up and down in the classroom, talking in his inevitable even style, often barely looking at his copious notes. And yet, for all his shyness and quietness, for undergraduate and postgraduate students, he was a rock star. Ravikant, who was his student, recalled how when Sumit visited his college, students crowded around him just to touch him, to be close to someone great. We can only imagine how Sumit, always dismissive of any attempt to venerate him, might have reacted to this. To be honest, though, he had immense empathy and understanding of students. As a supervisor and teacher, he was extraordinary. I still have his comments on my papers and chapters written in painstaking longhand. His suggestions, for instance, not to make generalizations based on one source where I was tending to, or to push the argument and look for further evidence elsewhere. Through these, he taught me a bit more about the historian's craft, which he knew so very well. I tested his patience and empathy when I would land up with my MPhil chapters after the deadline at their house on my Bajaj scooter, sometimes with a bloody arm or foot after one of the many minor accidents which I used to have while I was learning to drive. I was oblivious of the sight I presented, and though alarmed, he did not lose his composure. Sumit and Tanika helped me put body and soul and MPhil dissertation together. My driving skills improved, but they didn't want to test them after that. Many years later, after Sumit's terrible accident, in the early days when he was still quite unwell and finding simple tasks like buttoning his shirt difficult, his mind was razor sharp as ever. I was once there and struggling to find a reference to Peter Mayer's article on the Jajmani system, and was talking about this. And Sumit, lying in bed with his eyes closed, said, "Modern Asian Studies, 1993." He did recover somewhat in the years after that, and I'm grateful that he also read some of my PhD drafts and continued to work and publish so much. This last year has been hard for him, for Tanika, for Bochka and Anna. My heart really goes out to them because they, above all, must feel most what we are all feeling. This void that Sumit leaves behind in times that are bleak in so many, many ways in our university, in the country and elsewhere. We could feel sorrowful and be tempted to quote Macbeth, which is about the only Shakespeare I know, and I know was Sumit's favorite. So I'll just quote it anyway. We might be tempted to do that. This is depressing, though. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Alternatively, we could also be hopeful, as Sumit certainly was, about things getting better someday. While grieving his passing deeply, we should remember what he stood for, who he was, and instead sing the song, perhaps, that we did when we bid farewell to him on 15th August 2026, a song that he would have approved of, "We Shall Overcome."